Hey everybody, welcome to my book, Acting at the Speed of Life, Conquering Theatrical Style. I wrote this book back in the 2000s, and it's gotten some great response, and it's been picked up by several teachers to use in their classrooms. A few years ago, I started to do an audio version of the book, and I actually recorded all of the chapters during a phase of downtime between my performance tours. Well, I started to edit some of the audio, but it was a slow slog, as I really only have a glancing awareness of audio technology and editing. I also have a long learning curve every time I walk away from the project to do more performances on the road, so I never really got back to the audio project. And yet, these past years, in the midst of the pandemic, I've gotten more and more adept at video recording, and have picked up more attention on my YouTube channel and even built up a shiny new video channel, breakneckshakespeare.com. Maybe you're watching this from there. Maybe, I thought, rather than releasing the whole book in a nicely packaged audio edition, I can release the book in a video format in serial installments. You're now watching video number 1 of that series, The Introduction. I hope you enjoy it. For your info, in celebration of the almost 10th anniversary of this book, in addition to some tiny internal updates, I have retold the bulk of this introduction as part of a much longer keynote address, attaching it to the end of this book as the afterword. If you'd like a copy of my book, you can find it at several of the online booksellers out there, or you can order one from me directly at timmooney.com. If you give me your name, I'd be happy to inscribe it to you. I always start out each chapter with a teaser quote from the chapter of something that I found to be particularly meaningful and which I'd like to highlight so that maybe you notice it when it comes up again. You can imagine those teasers in a nice little italic style centered on the page right under each chapter heading. Here we go. Introduction. Who am I? The little voice in the back of my head was clarifying issues of presentation and staging that had been so elusive. There comes that dreaded moment in my acting workshops when the hosting professor asks, "So, tell us a little bit about your career. How'd you get started?" It's not that talking about myself is not my favorite topic, but usually I've got 2 hours or less to work with, and making any sense out of my own story sucks a good 10-15 minutes out of our available time. Quite often, my response is to offer up a view of my career as an example of what not to do. Actually, I don't regret the many choices I've made. Without them, I wouldn't have gotten here, now. And being here now is the perfect place to be. But certainly, along the way, I have often wished that I might get somewhere else faster. This book is the product of a number of entirely unanticipatable twists and turns I never might have expected life to take. In the process, I have found myself helming a series of projects which have given me a unique view on a particular area of the theater, and it has become my particular mission to share it. But traveling briefly back in time, I was evidently an actor by the time I reached the age of 6. You can see it in the home movies that my dad took. The fourth of 4 boys in the family, eventually followed by Sister Maureen, I grew up desperate for attention and struggling to differentiate myself from the pack. My stage debut was, I believe, as a reindeer in a 2nd grade performance of The Fir Tree. Years later, I played Marley's ghost in the 5th grade Christmas play and performed in the children's choruses of Oliver and Fiddler on the Roof. Usually my fellow students would be cast much better than myself, so I never contemplated overlong about acting as a career move. Getting better roles in high school, I enjoyed not so much the art of performance as the society of performers. I attended an all-boys high school, and our sister school imported boys to perform in their shows. In college, I found myself spending my extra time in the theater and felt no inclination to do anything else. I am perhaps the most stubborn or determined man I know, and was insistent on forging my own way in a field that was nothing like my father's or my siblings'. Eventually, looking to make my avocation feed the college credit that I could be earning, I unilaterally changed my major to theater and plunged into the deep end of the pool. I've never kept track of how many shows I've done, but a good estimation might figure about 5 per year from college forward. As we've passed 45 years by now, this suggests 175 shows or so. The last 15 years have centered largely around one-person shows, so the stream has slowed to one new show every year or two. Rather than let my mind fester during the summer following my freshman year, spent working at the Taco Bell, I set my sights toward reading all of Shakespeare's plays. The next summer, I attempted all of Strindberg and Shaw, though I must confess I never quite finished Man and Superman. Pretty sure nobody ever actually has. Reading Shakespeare seemed natural to me. Perhaps I had become accustomed to the thee and thou style of Thor comic books as a child, but later university classes in Shakespeare built my affinity, and an internship with the Alabama Shakespeare Festival followed. Upon graduation, I was one of 1,000 actors of my exact same type, auditioning for all of the same roles in the big city. I decided that learning to direct would be my ticket to steady work. This provided sufficient cover to return to academia, working on my Master of Fine Arts. The MFA was completed with a directing internship at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, where I had the pleasure of working with the amazing Larry Shue. Larry was to die in an airplane crash about a year later, but his ability to write as well as act had a profound impact on me. I saw him off Broadway performing the title role in a production of his own play, The Foreigner. As a youthful professor, I taught acting at Northern Illinois University for 2 years, but I had an uneasy feeling that I was simply parroting the acting texts planted in my hands. The material I was teaching didn't speak to the work I was actually doing, or the way that my brain was thinking about that work in practice. I didn't know how to come clean with what my inner voice was telling me, and I may have even been a bit embarrassed that that little voice wasn't saying the things that it should. And so I silently felt a little bit phony about the whole thing. At the Seattle Rep, I interned in literary management as well as directing, and found myself reading through the stacks of unsolicited scripts piled up in the office. I was assistant director on a production of Tartuffe, which was eventually to affect me much more deeply than I could have imagined. Reading through the slush pile of scripts, I realized that these manuscripts, a couple of which I recognized from my time at the Milwaukee Rep, were making the rounds through offices of theaters across the United States. Artistic directors and literary managers, occupied with putting theater on, were letting them pile up. And I envisioned a newsletter that would disseminate this information to theaters across the country, enabling theaters to target works that responded to their needs. I created The Script Review. For 7 years, I wrote about manuscripts, with 20 reviews in each newsletter, distributed to theaters nationwide. It was ambitious, challenging, fun, and never made any money. What I did learn over those years was how to articulate a point in a limited space. The expense of paper, toner, and postage taught me to tighten my prose. I found that the perfect word is always waiting out there somewhere, one which might describe the very particular idiosyncratic notion twisting its way through my head, which might effectively underline the dramatic action in the imagination of the reader, and still fit into the impossibly tight space I had allotted myself. I became artistic director of Stage 2, a small theater in Chicago's northern suburbs, and made use of the many excellent plays that I had been reading for the script review to assemble Stage 2's season. Any artistic director will tell you it is difficult to develop an audience exclusively through new work, but forever stubborn, I persisted, only occasionally compromising with the production of a familiar title. The summer months were the leanest of times, and during these, we focused our efforts on more familiar work. I stumbled back over Tartuffe. Among the theater staff, there was an energy and excitement in support of that play, and the brilliant Seattle rep cast from 9 years prior was vivid in my memory. Here was an opportunity to pursue our stated mission while still producing a familiar title. I had been exploring verse of late as a newfound proliferation of verbal chatter. The internet was suddenly unleashing a stream of unimpeded creative writing. I decided to try my hand at a new variation on Tartuffe. Many, myself included, scoffed at the notion, particularly as Richard Wilbur's version of the play was and remains quite popular. I did not expect I would actually finish the project. Yet, one line of iambic pentameter dialogue led to a rhyming line, which led me to another and yet another couplet, and on through the opening scene and through the first, second, and third acts. I paused for auditions, and the first couple of actors to show up left me disappointed at my apparently lackluster writing. The rhythms and stresses were all off somehow. Dialogue that I imagined to be knockdown, drag-out hilarious was coming out dour, ponderous, and witless. It wasn't until a very talented actress read the role of Doreen that the play came roaring back. There was a life in the thing, and it simply needed actors who could see that life bubbling just beneath the formal structure of the verse, who were equipped in turn with the vocal apparatus to make those bubbles of wit pop where the audience could see, hear, and enjoy them. I dove back in, writing Acts 4 and 5 in record time. The play worked on more levels than I imagined, and I got off the treadmill of running a theater to concentrate on what was now a writing career. I tested this theatrical magic repeatedly, eager to know if this was an ability that lived reliably within me or was the product of my special relationship with Tartuffe. I explored new versions of the plays of Molière, The School for Husbands, The Miser, The Precious Young Maidens, 17 plays in all, as well as streamlined, shortened versions for high school competition, maybe 25 scripts all in all so far. Occasionally, a theater would produce one of these, or sometimes I would rejoin my old theater to work on one of them. I might well travel to see a production in the far exotic reaches of Ohio, Colorado, or Michigan. Sometimes actors would recapture the life, wit, and zest, much like that early audition for Doreen, and sometimes the thing would fall flat, dour, ponderous, witless. Subconsciously, I isolated differences between successful and less successful performances. Some actors would struggle, while others picked up the style with ease. Occasionally, I would see a video of a show to which I was unable to lend direct support, and now and then I would be quietly grateful to not have been present. Shifting from the role of director to that of actor, repeated coincidences found me playing the roles that Molière himself had originally performed. Much as Molière had carried the bulk of the responsibilities with his theater, or as Larry Shue had played the foreigner, I found I could likewise lead by example, establishing a performance style, speaking through the voice that I was already hearing in the back of my head, the voice that had been there back when I was choosing one word rather than another. Simultaneously, I was speaking on the luncheon circuit, promoting performances to the Kiwanis, the Rotary, the Eagles, and one engagement with the Canadian Women's Guild planted an idea in my head. They didn't want a lecture about Molière. They wanted a solo performance of Molière. I resisted this notion, indignantly assuming that fragmenting the work of Molière would violate his spirit, disturbing his delicately structured layers of plot. Or more likely, I was embarrassed by the arrogance of a one-man performance which would continue to manipulate my own ego even further front and center. And yet, having generated these words and played many of these roles, I was living a strange, parallel life to my favorite playwright. Most of Moliere's translators were French language experts or poets, and very few of these authors would have the inclination, much less the ambition or theatrical instinct to play these parts. Moliere Then Thou was created and memorized within 6 months, and although it only saw moderate success when performed at my home theater, the minimal simplicity of its design made it easily transportable. I established bookings for the performance, slowly at first. Before long, it had transformed itself into the preoccupying thrust of my career. Within 2 years, I was driving around the States, performing for perhaps 10,000 students a year, and running acting workshops, which gave me the opportunity to develop and explore acting theory in practice. Along the way, and through the course of writing this book, the tour has continued. 20 years as of this recording, while adding 10 more one-person shows in the process. What a megalomaniac. My plunge back into Shakespeare with the one-person show Lot O' Shakespeare arose when I was already a dozen or so drafts into the composition of this text, and while I've slipped in a number of observations from that experience, there will be more to come either in future editions or in some unconceived book yet to be written. Side note, I've published perhaps 8 of my one-man shows now, as I record this in 2022, featuring all of the insight and wit you will, I am sure, come to enjoy over the course of this volume. 35 years ago, I was teaching somebody else's acting theories, and they were never quite a good fit. But now, as the author of these works, the little voice in the back of my head has gotten more specific and insistent about issues of presentation and staging that had been so elusive. I found myself faced with issues that had been left unarticulated. Students are not always getting the straight stuff, and acting theory has fragmented into a million schools of thought. Well, now I'm making that 1,000,001. Theater practitioners get into elaborate arguments about being true to Shakespeare or Moliere, and gradually I've developed an opinion on that subject. Having written most of my work in verse, I listen for the musicality of that verse in a particular manner. I imagine Shakespeare and Moliere listening in a similar manner, and my fantasy imagines they themselves underlining certain passages in this book, perhaps murmuring the odd, defiant, yes. This is not intended as the only acting text in an actor's library. A strict adherence to these notions without any corresponding exploration of the internal side of acting technique would leave the actor significantly imbalanced in favor of external performance style. While working on this, I continued to revisit the work of Stanislavski, reminding myself of the brilliant study to which so many of us owe such debt and with whom I will seem to be in such conflict. Lurking behind Stanislavski's system is the context of an era that celebrated bombast, broad, stylized declamation, exaggerated to such a degree that it had lost touch with an internal spirit of truth, emotion, or communion. A rebel of his time, Stanislavski led actors out of that particular desert, much as Shakespeare placed words in Hamlet's mouth to rail against his contemporary actors who were out Heroding Herod. In either instance, these men would likely be shocked at how very far we have come from the context of those times, and might well want to nudge us back in the other direction by now. Or perhaps I am the bizarro world Stanislavski, his evil doppelganger pointing you back towards a sense of theatricality that got thrown out with the bathwater, as it were, the other side of a coin, which cannot be entirely divided from its heads or its tails. Or perhaps I like to think of this as the acting book that Moliere would write, had he suspected that his assumed, often stylized and external manner of performance would not be painfully self-evident and obvious. Or not. Thanks for joining me for my first video release of Acting at the Speed of Life, Conquering Theatrical Style. I hope you'll come back and join me for more. Subscribe to this channel to make sure you don't miss any of them. Again, you can pick up this book with an online retailer, or you can order one from me directly at timmooneyRep.com. I also continue to tour my shows around the United States and sometimes around the world. You can find them on my website, breakneckshakespeare.com, or you can hire me to come out and perform for you. Write to me or visit me at timmooneyRep.com. See you on the stage.